Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barnier. We move now to our speakers for the Parliament. Brexit Coordinator, Mr. Verhofstadt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to welcome the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. I think that we can say easily today that both have been built around the principles of the European Union. And that means the integrity of the single market. That means the four freedoms who are underpinning this single market, and that means the ability, the capacity of the European Union to decide in an autonomous way. But I have to tell you, and I think it's important in this debate, that also two other elements have been taken into account. The first are naturally the positions, maybe I have to say the red lines, of the UK government following the decision to end the membership of the European Union. And then a second important point that underpins this agreement or these agreements, and that is something often underplayed and not fully understood, and that is the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. Though the European Union is in fact not a direct party in this, the 1998 agreement was only possible among EU member states, between EU member states. And it shows, in my opinion, that the European Union is about that, about reconciliation, about the end of violence, about peace. And the result of this, all this, is the withdrawal agreement, and I think the only and best agreement possible, considering these three elements that I have just described. And in achieving this, I would like to thank naturally and congratulate, it's not the first time that I'm doing this, Michel Barnier personally. He has done a tremendous job in close cooperation with the European Parliament and with the Brexit steering group, and that gives me also the possibility to also congratulate all the members of the Brexit steering group for the good cooperation beyond the lines of the political parties, and I think that it worked very well. Now the result, Michel, is an agreement that, in my opinion, does three things. The first is to minimize the disruption for both sides, in particular for the economy, and to allow for an orderly withdrawal and allow for a time frame between 2 and 4 years to conclude the negotiations on the future relationship. Second result is to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland and to safeguard the Good Friday Agreement and to secure peace. And then third, and it will also, I think, and that was our first priority of the European Parliament, safeguard the rights of our citizens. And here the European Parliament has, I think, with the help and with the support of our negotiators, significantly improved the agreement and the text. And moreover, we are also committed, and I want to tell this today, that before we start the consent procedure in the European Parliament, we receive from our British counterparts the necessary guarantees that all these citizens' rights will be fully implemented. So I believe, dear colleagues, that this framework, withdrawal agreement and political declaration, provides for the possibility, I think, to establish in the future a really close relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And the basis, therefore, as you have seen in the agreement, in the political declaration, is an association agreement, as the European Parliament has proposed from day one. And why an association agreement, on which also the British government has agreed? Well, it will be applicable once concluded in a provisional way, after the approval on the European level. And secondly, it will be ratified in one round of ratification by the member states. So to avoid, I should say, if I may so, the complexity of, for example, our relationship with Switzerland, what is based not on one association agreement, but on a patchwork of agreements. The Brexit Steering Group, along with the whole European Parliament chair, will further scrutinise the deal, the withdrawal agreement, the political declaration on the future relationship as part of the consent procedure, and the Parliament will, in this respect, look very careful into how the so-called joint committee will work. The joint committee, we want to ensure that the decisions...
Sorry, Mr Verhofstadt. Colleagues, I'm in the chair, so I will call time with due respect. So thank you for your guidance, but you would respect the chair, please. Mr Verhofstadt.
I'm in my last paragraphs, Chair. The Parliament will, in this respect, look very carefully into how the so-called joint committee will work. We want to ensure that the decisions that are taken by the joint committee are legitimate and, where it is necessary, require also the approval of the Parliament. And I hope that before we start the consent procedure, we can have an agreement with the Council. Let me clear, and that's my end, there will be no winners in this. I think that the departure of the UK from the Union is a failure for everybody, for the UK and for the EU. Last Sunday, we have to tell that to our colleagues, was a sad day for both. So let us make the best of it in the knowledge that once there will be in the near future a new generation in Britain, I'm pretty sure about that, who will decide to come back into the great political European family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Verhofstadt. Mr Brok.
Madam President, President in Council, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Brexit is a very bad affair for the European Union and for Great Britain. More for Great Britain, given its size, but it's also a bad thing for us as well. And on Sunday, as Mr Verhofstadt, thanks very much, because this is a very good analysis. This was a sad day on Sunday. But given the negotiating skills of Mr Barnier and his team, his patience, the way that information was disseminated around the Union, we got the best possible deal that was available. And I must say that the UK is split, it's divided, politics is divided, the country is divided, and the 27 have been united from start to finish. The European Union is united, and it has a great future going forward, as it's demonstrated in the Brexit negotiations. And we must recognise that this damage done to the UK, as the Governor of the Bank of England said only yesterday, big losses of growth in the UK will be caused by Brexit, more so than 2008 with the economic crisis. That's what the Governor of the Bank of England was saying only yesterday. And whatever people say, it's a lie to say that things are not going to change, and change for the worse. We must recognise that this means, and I think that the European Parliament will back this, it means that this is the end of the road for negotiations. No other deals. It's not a question of saying no, then we'll try again, we'll change things, we'll titivate things. No, this is the one. And it's take it or leave it. It was a long process of negotiation. And let it be clear that the withdrawal treaty is a transitional arrangement. And I'm not sure everyone in the UK is aware of that. If there is no treaty, then there will be no transitional period, and it's going to be an abrupt break. And we must also recognise that with this treaty, with this withdrawal agreement, it must be made clear that this is a very risky initiative for the Remainers. Rejecting this 28th of March, hoping something else is going to come, like in the case of the Irish referendum, that's a very risky business. It's important to take this deal in order to minimise the damage and contain the damage. And I say this to both sides around the divide in the UK. We have established that with this, the transitional arrangement will take place and citizens' rights will be vouchsafed, they will be preserved. They depend on the EU for their future plans, both sides. and the huge human and social complications given Ireland and Northern Ireland is there as well. The transitional period has to enter into effect so that negotiations can take place. The purpose of the backstop is that it's not supposed ever to kick in. It's not to be invoked, not to be used. And I think that again has to be prominent in the debate in the United Kingdom. The future relationship, I think, in the best interests of everyone, to contain the damage, we have to approach that with a constructive spirit towards a denouement and a solution. Not a customs union because they want to make trade agreements. They don't want to respect the four freedoms. But we've got to look for the area of the possible and get a treaty which is far-reaching. Theresa May is quite right when in spring she said the closer our standards are, the more level the playing field, the more market access they will be. And again, that's something we have got to bear in mind. Again, in order to minimise the damage as far as is possible. The partnership agreement initiated by the European Parliament, that's part and parcel of the agreement now. The trade agreement is there, and also on the external policy in terms of foreign policy and security, combating terrorism, the involvement of the UK in that endeavour as part and parcel of the common defence policy. Both sides want that to be there, and the withdrawal agreement is the framework to provide that for negotiations so that we can underpin the security of our people and our citizens and research. When you look at UK universities, the research programmes, very important, both sides. One final comment. Mr Farage writes Trump's speeches, and he said they didn't want a withdrawal agreement because they didn't want to negotiate. Mr Trump, President Trump, wants the European countries to be isolated, to be divided, so that he can exploit the chink there and exploit the chink in the armour. We need a European Union which is united and which can help us and defend us against the Trumps and all the rest. And we're not going to allow that to be destroyed by President Trump's speechwriter here in the Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Brok. Mr. Gualtieri.
Thank you, President. Dear Michel, dear colleagues, after long and difficult negotiations, the agreement reached on Sunday sets the basis for an orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union, and we are ready to ratify it. On behalf of the S&D Group, I would like to thank Michel Barnier for the outstanding work he and his team have done in dealing with this historical challenge. At the same time, I cannot hide my profound sadness for the UK's choice to leave the Union. Our group respects this decision, but we deeply regret it. We consider it an historical mistake. In our eyes, it will always be a lose-lose situation. Despite the disappointment and the frustration, the EU and we all have acted since the very beginning of the process with responsibility and respect. We have worked tirelessly for more than 2 years to protect those most affected by the decision and to alleviate its worst possible consequences. This was achieved thanks to the guidance of our chief negotiators, thanks to the unity within and between the EU institutions. And I would like also to thank Guy Verhofstadt and all the members of the Brexit steering group. We have been and we shall be always united. The EU has been responsible towards the UK by providing the basis to deliver an orderly withdrawal without any feelings of revenge or resentment. We have also been responsible toward ourselves and our citizens, not to endanger the European project and the integrity of our Union. This sense of responsibility shall continue to guide us going forward. One thing must be clear, though. There is no alternative deal to the one agreed on Sunday. Considering the red lines of the United Kingdom, this is the best and the only possible agreement. It is a deal that protects citizens' rights, safeguards the integrity of a single market and the customs union, and crucially prevents a hard border on Ireland, respecting the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts. We know that on citizen rights, which have been our priority from the start, our work is far from being finished, and we will remain vigilant with respect to the implementation of this part of the agreement. We will never allow EU citizens to fall victim to the same disgraceful hostile environment policies that saw members of the Windrush generation wrongly deported. The political declaration accompanying the withdrawal agreement establishes the framework and basis for an ambitious, broad and deep partnership. This unprecedented partnership, which should take the form of an association agreement, shall fully respect the integrity of a single market and the autonomy of our legal order. We also welcome all the interpretative declarations adopted by the Council and consider them legally binding, including with regard to Gibraltar. On the future relationships, the UK has made its red line clear throughout the process, just as we have, and we respect this. In the negotiation, we have shown a high degree of flexibility, and we have stretched the deal as much as we could in order to take into account the position and the constraints of the United Kingdom. We have always said, and we repeat it also now, that if the UK changes its mind, our arms are and will remain open. But as far as you want to leave the single market and no longer apply the principle of free movement of persons, this is the only possible way to orderly leaving the European Union, avoiding the severe disruption of a no-deal scenario. There is no other deal that could respect such limits without compromising or endangering our European project. This Parliament is a very symbol of our common project of links between countries and people. This is why we will continue to play a responsible, a proactive role in safeguarding the integrity of the Union and ensuring a positive future relationship with the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Gualtieri. Mr. Van Orden.
A lot of experts on domestic British policy these days. Look, Brexit was always about much more than the economy. In a way, because the European Union strayed so far into many other areas, into our national lives, it is why the British people voted for Brexit. They were increasingly unhappy with this tendency. You say you didn't want Brexit, but you did nothing to avoid it. But of course, the economic aspects are central. A bad deal for Britain or no deal will have repercussions in many European countries as well as Britain. Much time seems to be spent here on predicting events in London and the consequences of Brexit for Britain. Perhaps we should look at the impact of a bad deal or a sour relationship on the European Union. Certainly the British government entered into negotiations in a spirit of goodwill, aiming for a positive future partnership. There's been astonishment in Britain over the legalistic inflexibility that has been shown quite often. But we all know that the EU will bend or break any of its own rules when it suits it. And instead of defending the long-term interests of EU countries, it seems to have chosen to pursue a narrow ideological course, defending a particular view of the EU project, which is increasingly repudiated by citizens across Europe. And it may appeal to the leaders of a couple of the larger countries in the European Union. Instead of listening to citizens, your answer to everything is just more Europe. And by the way, I think a lot of people have been very cross in Britain about the discourteous way in which our Prime Minister seems often to have been treated. Because of your insistence on a bizarre sequencing arrangement, you've wasted 2 years when you could already have made progress on a free trade agreement. All other issues would then have fallen into place. It wasn't necessary to do it in the way you did. This makes it all the more important to move quickly into negotiating our future relationship and reaching rapid but correct conclusions. But we need some reassurance and flexibility, indeed guarantees from the EU over concerns that have been expressed. We need an atmosphere of trust and goodwill from your side if we are to have that future positive, stable relationship that is surely the least that all our citizens demand. Thank you.
Michel Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, at the EU Council last Sunday, many asked me if I felt sad. Actually, rather than sadness, I felt gratefulness first to Michel Barnier and his outstanding team. Not only did they negotiate the agreement keeping in mind the common interest of the EU without ever losing their nerves, they did so, and that is one of Michel Barnier's defining qualities, involving the Council and Parliament on an equal footing, keeping the EU team together in more than one way. Of course, this agreement is not perfect. As far as we Green CFA are concerned, we would have liked to see something more than non-regression clauses on social and environmental matters as a condition for the UK staying in the customs union. And the political declaration should again have been more explicit about conditioning our future relationship on the UK not becoming a tax haven or a money laundering country. Count on us to be tough on these issues as we move forward. I also felt relieved that after 18 months of very hard work, an agreement could be found. Had that not been the case, the worst-case scenario of the UK crashing out of the European Union would have become the likeliest, causing major damage not just to business, but above all to people. Relief that the EU could reach this agreement with the UK without compromising on its integrity. Relief that the British government had finally come to terms with reality. The ball is now clearly in the UK's court. The Prime Minister has come to terms with reality, but it remains to be seen whether she will find a majority supporting the deal in the House of Commons. To the dissatisfied Brexiteers, I will say this. If a negotiated Brexit is what you want, and unless you would also consider keeping the country inside the single market, no other deal is available. Whoever negotiates on behalf of the UK will face the same legal constraints as Theresa May did. And I hope no one of you is seriously considering leaving without an agreement. Because if the UK did that, it would be in breach of the Good Friday Agreement, because at once a border would be re-erected in Ireland. It would also be in breach of its financial commitments taken under the EU treaties during its membership period, because leaving a club, my friends, does not free you of paying your outstanding debt. In other terms, crushed Brexit would make the UK a rogue state, a country whose signature with any other partner would amount to just nothing. The real choice, therefore, is only between Brexit under the terms negotiated and no Brexit at all. That choice will have such an impact on the future of the country that as a Democrat I would find it normal that we would ask the people, especially as the major parties seem to be very divided on the issue. I will agree with Remainers that your country finds itself in a less enviable position now than it was as a member state, because indeed, the European Union is a boost to sovereignty. In this world, if we want to have impact, we need to act together. And I think many British citizens realise that. Are they a majority? Are they a majority? We don't know. Can we find a way to ask them? If there is one, it is very narrow. But I'm certain though, that if the UK would want to renounce its intention to leave, we should embrace it back with pleasure. Equally, and that is my final word, Mrs. President, I think it would be utterly irresponsible to end up with the UK crashing out of the European Union, either voluntarily or inadvertently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel Lambert. Madam Zimmer.
In its meeting last weekend, the Council approved the divorce agreement between the EU and the UA. However, no one can say at the moment whether that will lead to an orderly Brexit. It is time to prepare for the worst case scenario, a no-deal situation. Our work in the political group, the Brexit steering group, and the work on the resolutions of the Parliament from April 2017 was not something that was going to be easy from the outset. The decision to be involved in the work of the Brexit steering group was right. And in relation to that, I'd like to say that the cooperation with Michel Barnier has set standards for the future cooperation between institutions in the European Union. We also have to say very clearly that the withdrawal agreement is no cause for celebration. The requirements that we wanted to see respected for Northern Ireland and for individual rights are perhaps not as complete as we would have liked. We cannot make up for shortfalls in the withdrawal agreement with agreements about the future arrangements. The withdrawal agreement also contains the backstop, which is an emergency solution. That has been agreed in order to avoid a terrible outcome in Ireland. At the same time, it doesn't meet what was promised in the joint report at the end of last year. The border as dividing Ireland will become harder, and border crossing arrangements will be more difficult. Good Friday, rights guaranteed in the Good Friday Agreement will be minimalised. Certainly, we've seen efforts from Theresa May to promote the withdrawal agreement. It is being put forward as a way of stopping queue jumping from the EU to the UK. And a number of colleagues in the government and in Parliament here have not fully understood the essence of European citizenship and the rights that bestows. They forget that it gives their own citizens rights, which are now being taken away. There is a suspicion that EU citizens could be discriminated against after the process of Brexit. After the separation of Great Britain and the United Kingdom and the European Union, we have heard that there will be great efforts on both sides to have a very close partnership, but that will require a lot of work. I agree with Verhofstadt that we need to protect the interests of citizens not only in Great Britain but also the European Union. And we certainly also want to protect the interests of citizens of Great Britain and the United Kingdom in living in the European Union. So that is an issue alongside the issue of Northern Ireland, which we'll continue working for. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Zimmer. Mr. Farage.
I'm in no doubt that this withdrawal agreement is a good deal. It's a good deal because it involves large transfers of money. It's a good deal because it maintains free movement of people. It's a good deal because it keeps Britain in the customs union and stuck with the EU's rulebook. And crucially, the key point, as Mr Barnier said this morning, there is the backstop, which means, of course, the United Kingdom can be held effectively as a hostage for many years to come. It's a good deal for the European Union. For the UK, I think it's probably the worst deal in history. Something, Mr Brok, that President Trump has noticed. And, by the way, he is a great respecter of the great nation states of Europe and certainly no enemy of any single one of them. No, Mr Barnier, I have to say I wish you were on our side, really, because it's game, set and match to you. You probably can't even believe your luck that you came up against the British Prime Minister who met every single demand of yours whilst at the same time trying to deceive the British public, and you took it to the big summit on Sunday, and in 38 minutes it was all agreed, done and dusted, and off to lunch. Well, I have to say, we will be leaving on March the 29th next year, but any illusion at home that we're going to be an independent country, I'm afraid, has been shattered. And you know, before the ink was even dry last Sunday, President Macron of France stood up and decided to start to threaten us. Now, I understand the French do catch 90% of the haddock in the west of the English Channel and we get 10. I understand their interests, but I fear that we're very much now open and at your mercy over the course of the next few years. And the truth of it is, the political declaration, in that, you haven't got to give us anything. You don't need to give us a thing. And that is why this is going to fail in Parliament and probably fail by a very big margin. Now, Mr. Barnier, you say this is the only possible deal, but this deal isn't going to be accepted. So perhaps we all need to grow up and recognise that there is a strong chance now of the UK leaving on March the 29th with a WTO no deal. We need a negotiated deal to deal with sensible border issues. I wonder, Mr. Barnier, are you prepared for that? Because you seem this morning to assume that the British Parliament is going to ratify this. It isn't.
Monsieur Le Breton.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. The British people decided 2 years ago to leave the European Union. Their sovereign decision must be respected. For the Europe of nations and freedom which I represent here today, respect for the wishes of such a nation is paramount. It's shocking that the European Court of Justice has received a case which we will decide upon on the 4th of December, questioning this deal. And it could not be the case elsewhere. In France, the relevant court has refused to carry out such controls after the event on a referendum. We need to resist any such initiative. Sovereignty is not something that's confined to treaties or to what judges decide. It's a meta-legal power allowing each people to decide freely on their destiny. So long live the British people. Long live Brexit.
Mr. Carver.
Last week, Angela Merkel said, and I quote, "What's been important to us is that the UK cannot decide unilaterally when the customs union ends, but rather has to define that time frame jointly with the EU. The European institutions took control in 1973 and ironically continue that control through this 2018 Brexit betrayal deal. This deal means that we remain a nation of supplicants. We've lost the freedom teasingly dangled before us through the 2016 referendum results, when the British establishment and political class were rudely reminded that the British people want to take back their sovereign control. Ataturk's wise words now seem more appropriate than ever when he said, "Sovereignty is not given, it is taken." This is a terrible deal. Bad because the EU continues to hold my country over a barrel, and the British politicians who sign up to it need to understand that history will be their judge, and believe you me, it will judge them all very badly. Madam President, a number of friendly pro-European colleagues within this Parliament have openly admitted to me that they cannot believe their luck in how bad a deal this is for the UK, and it surely cannot be allowed to proceed on such a one-sided basis. Thank you.
I now give the floor for the last word to our chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier.